Okay, so a while back I did cover the first book of the Fabius Bile Trilogy by Josh Reynolds, which was Fabius Bile Primogenitor. However, I realized that that review was not my best work. So I decided to delete the old video and essentially restart it, but this time instead of just one book, I would cover the entire trilogy in a massive review. So you guys, I'm very excited to cover all three of these, as I actually managed to finish the third book in like 3 different days, and it was a 507-page book. So guys, I'm very excited to talk about this one. But yes, this is where I give Fabius Bile justice from the first book review. And I'm really excited to talk about him. So let's get into it. So we'll start off by saying this. The first book, Fabius Bile Primogenitor, does have a slow start, but then it starts to rapidly pick up speed the further you read. Whereas Clone Lord and Manflayer, they hit the ground running and they do not stop until the very end of it. Like, you barely even have time to breathe because it's going from like action sequence to action sequence to action sequence, and it just blows you away as you cannot stop reading. But it feels like you barely even have time to breathe before he's jumping to the next piece. But again, Primogenitor, for me, was definitely the slowest one, despite it being like the smallest at around 300 something pages. Unlike Clone Lord and Manflayer, with Clone Lord rounding out at about 488 pages, and Manflayer, as I stated before, rounding out about 507. But I will say this. Fabius himself is not really like many of the other characters that I've read from the ChaosSpaceMarines books. He's not focused on revenge or seeking personal power or just satisfying the whims of gods playing their great game. He's focused on what his personal goal is, bringing humanity to a new stage. Because as he views the Imperium as this rotting carcass, he wants to create a better humanity from the ashes. And so he has. Essentially, he gives these new humans, or Homo Novus as he calls them, kind of these superhuman traits like extreme reflexes, great strength, slow aging, and even the major skills for combat. Which, all in all, his motivations make him a very unique character. Not to mention he tries to focus on himself outside of the machinations of his leech and the Emperor's children, which by this point have slid far from their place of power. Because see, the Fabius Bile Trilogy, if you want to look at it from a chronological timeline, this trilogy actually takes place after the first book of the Black Legion series, Talon of Horus. So this one picks up where the Emperor's children have been utterly decimated, and throughout this whole entire trilogy, you see Fabius constantly interacting with his old legion, as they are consistently trying to rise from the ashes of their greatest defeat. Which to me, if you're going to take something like your home base is completely destroyed by a ship, converted into a missile, dropped on your home base, and you still want to try to come back from that, that takes determination, but I also sense a lot more of wounded pride here. But Fabius tries to stay out of it, but he keeps getting drawn back through many different means. For instance, Primogenitor has it where one of his old students tries to get him more involved in trying to retake command as Lieutenant Commander of the Emperor's children. And in order to do so, he actually hires the Harlequins. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Harlequins are a branch of the Eldar race who are pretty freaking terrifying, I'm not going to lie to you guys, because they stand outside of the normal craft world Eldar and the Dark Eldar, because they themselves have more along the lines of performance. Like, they dance around in gaudy colors, wearing masks, They can slip in and out of shadows, and you constantly hear them quoting famous stories or songs as they bring about the performance. Like, everything to them is a performance. And that alone makes them unsettling as you watch them dance around you, plotting your murder, essentially. Like, they will kill anyone who gets in the way of their performance, and that just makes them all the more terrifying because it makes them unpredictable. And the funny thing is, Fabius not only has to deal with the Emperor's children either trying to recruit him or kill him, seeing him as either a threat or a means to an end, but he also has to deal with the many different Eldar. Like, at one point, at the end of Fabius Bile Primogenitor, it has him taking on an Eldar craft world. The craft world of Luganoth, I believe the name was. And that part really had me hook, line, and sucker, because he actually aligns himself with a party of the Emperor's children, and they raid this craft world to immense success. Even though you could tell by this point Fabius was much slower, but then of course he is reconstituted in a new clone body within Clone Lord, making him much younger and stronger. And that alone really picks up the pace of it, because by this point Fabius isn't as degraded, seeing as how he seems to suffer from this genetic blight that is constantly sucking away at his life. In fact, it is even described in Primogenitor when he's doing his self-operation, that it's like these cancerous growths are spreading across his internal organs. And let me tell you, that was a completely unsettling image to view in my mind. This is why I don't think I could handle surgeries or anything like that. But anyways, so Clone Lord picks it up from where Primogenitor leaves off a few centuries down the road, where Fabius awakens and he's in a much younger body, but however, he is drawn back due to a severe prize it has found from the Third Legion, which is a massive cache of uncorrupted gene seed that was once owned by the Third Legion before it mysteriously disappeared. So he is drawn back with his old cohorts in the Third Legion, who essentially want to use him as a means to an end. They want him to track down the gene seed and bring it to them, and then they will kill him outright or chain him. That's the thing. Fabius is constantly struggling for people who want to either chain him or just straight up kill him, because they view him as an anomaly, a very significant threat. Because if you kill him, he'll just reconstitute in another clone body somewhere across the galaxy, and then he'll be back at it. But anyways, but if I were to pick the best one out of all of them, I would definitely say Clone Lord, or maybe even Manflayer. Manflayer provides a very satisfying conclusion to everything, yet Clone Lord is what really picked up the pace of this trilogy and gave me second thoughts on Fabius' trilogy as a whole. Because Primogenitor left me feeling a bit dissatisfied with just how much of a slower pace it was, but Clone Lord went ahead and changed my mind about it, and that's why I so eagerly dived into Manflayer. But circling back on the Eldar, not only does he have to deal with the Eldar themselves as well as the Harlequins, but throughout Manflayer, it actually shows Fabius struggling against the Dark Eldar, who have a very personal vendetta against Fabius, seeing as how he wiped out two of their clans, as well as essentially left a major scar of shame on some of these Dark Eldar leaders. Because how they come to the equation is that by the end of Clone Lord, after Fabius manages to find the cache of uncorrupted gene seed, he essentially is given a clue by the Harlequins to visit the dark city of Komorog, the home base of the Dark Eldar. Unfortunately, and this kind of irritates me, despite the fact that it's alluded to a lot throughout Manflayer, we never really see Fabius within Komorog. There is no story about that as far as I'm aware, which is kind of disappointing, because I thought that would have been fascinating to actually see how he did in Komorog, how he found it, what he did there. just everything from his perspective. And essentially, the Dark Eldar feel it as a blow to them because he stole a lot of their secrets and techniques. And essentially, they view it as a blow of wounded pride, and they just about destroy him. And frankly, that alone raised the stakes in Manflayer. Clone Lord, though, is where it really got started. Because not only was he dealing with the Third Legion, either trying to kill him or trying to chain him, but the funny thing is, he actually encounters the Necrons. And this actually surprised me. He actually runs into Trazyn the Infinite. For those of you who don't know, Trazyn the Infinite is a very key character within Warhammer 40k lore, especially among the Necrons. He's an outlier, I would say, a kind of an outsider to his species, because he doesn't really focus on fighting against all the forces of the galaxy. He's more or less a collector. Like Fabius, he actually collects, not creatures, but he collects moments of time involving certain things. Like, it can go from like a single battle between Space Marines to a massive Kork, the ancestors of the Orc race, to just about anything. Trazyn has it in his collection to study and analyze. So in a way, he and Fabius have a certain kinship about them. And in fact, the main reason Fabius was even able to get the Gene Seed was because he made a deal with Trazyn, a sort of exchange, if you will. Originally, it was to have a clone body of Fabius with a copy of his brain for Trazyn to either discuss things with or just to analyze. However, there was a key point within Clone Lord that really was the more changing point. Because the one thing I've noticed is that the Primarchs seemingly play a massive role throughout the Chaos Marines, as far as I'm aware, the Demon Primarchs, the ones who have turned traitor. And there's no exception here with Fabius. However, Fulgrim, his Gene Father, his Primarch, comes in two very different ways. For example, in Manflayer, we actually get to see Fulgrim in all his Demon Primarch glory, and let me tell you right now, that was an interesting piece to see him. I did not even expect that we would even see a Demon Primarch appear in this trilogy, and that caught me completely off guard. It caught me by complete surprise, especially as I was reading this. I was envisioning him having this like slithery, smoky just kind of evil, devious voice, and it just, it set me on edge, I'm not gonna lie. Because the way Fulgrim is described, he's got the lower half of a serpent, but the upper body of like a four-armed genie. Since apparently Fulgrim is a Demon Primarch of Slaanesh. And that alone is a terrifying prospect, considering what Slaanesh actually represents. But going back on Fulgrim, he actually does appear in the second book, but in a very different approach. So if you'll remember, when I was talking about Talon of Horus, I mentioned how Fabius had actually managed to clone the Primarch Horus Lupercal before the Black Legion destroyed him. However, what I did not realize is that he had actually cloned more of the Primarchs from before they became corrupted and turned into Demon Primarchs. He actually managed to get pure genetic samples of the Emperor's children. And just that alone was mind-boggling to think of. In fact, but this plays into the fact of how in Clone Lore, he visits the remains of his old lab, and he actually finds the clone of his Gene Father, Fulgrim, still intact and still alive somehow. And instead of killing him, he actually comes up with the crazy idea to raise this clone of his Gene Father to essentially be a better person than the original Fulgrim, one who was uncorrupted by vanity or the need to be better, that diving into excess, just everything before he became a Demon Primarch. So we actually see this clone Fulgrim and his interactions with Fabius throughout Clone Lord. And I gotta tell you guys, that actually promoted a very interesting storyline as it shows him having this grandiose vision with the new Fulgrim and then this new cache of gene seed to essentially recreate the Emperor's Children Legion from the ashes. And the way it ended does leave you with a bittersweet taste in your mouth at the end of that little story arc. All in all, I will say it did have a slow start, but once it really picked up the gears, the Fabius Bile Trilogy really blew me away with just how engaging it became. So if you want to see this man fighting off against just either the Eldar, the Dark Eldar, the Harlequins, Necrons, and even his own rogue legion of corrupted Space Marines, I would highly recommend this, especially if you want to see more of his crazy experiments, what he does. Because the way I look at Fabius, he is essentially the mad scientist trope of Warhammer 40k. And the way it ends of this trilogy really does give you a satisfying conclusion, and honestly leaves you craving more. So again, I do recommend this trilogy. But for now, let me skip all of this and go right to his overall score of this entire trilogy. So in the end, my overall score for this entire trilogy as a whole would be a solid 8 out of 10. Because like I stated before, it does start off slow, but once it picks up speed and gets rolling, it really pulls you in with just how engaging the read was. I'm actually looking forward to doing more like this because I figured if I can do more trilogies like this, this will be the first of new trilogy reviews, if I can. Anyways, you guys, thanks again for listening to me ramble about just some of the stories that I love. I'm looking forward to doing more for you guys. If you have any suggestions, please either like, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't. And again, thank you all for listening, and have a good day. This is Ramble and Collector, signing off.